So we are talking about how to analyze real estate markets and figure out what kind of data it is that we use to essentially evaluate how things are going. And so today we have Gloria Schmitt, our chief people developer, aka the data queen, with us. How you doing, Gloria?
I am awesome. How are you?
The weather's starting to give, and the markets are the markets. And as things shift, my nerd brain keeps firing off, and so this was just one of those things where I was like, I have to ask how the master is doing this.
Hey, you know me. I love to share. I love to tell you like my secrets, right? These aren't secrets. It's just a matter of what we're going to tap into. We learned a long time ago that, well, let's just say, even in the last week, we've realized how much the market could change.
Hmm.
And real estate agents can no longer just be people pleasers, people solvers. Now you have to really be numbers people because it is going to affect your business.
Absolutely.
Now,
Well, at least in our office, it's a well-known fact that every month, at the very bare minimum, you are giving us a lot of statistics for us to present to our prospects and clients to keep them informed on how this market is moving. Obviously, also how amazing our office has done and continues to be. So I guess just wanted to tap into kind of your routine in terms of, so what numbers do you like to look at to give you a picture of how the markets are working? Like, what resources do you tend to use to kind of pull out that information? Because I've tried early on, and I realized I was spending a lot of time clicking through things, and the frustration was I don't know where to look. So, and I know that there are a lot of agents who's going to have this, and just tapping into how agents, for instance, might be able to replicate this data for them to do like on a whim. Hopefully, save you some time.
well, first and foremost, as far as stats, I
Hmm.
am consistently, my first focus is always on absorption rate. Now, if you are a new agent and you don't know what that means, it basically compares how many active listings there are, how quickly they're selling, and at the end of the day, how many months of inventory do we have in the market. That tells us two things. One, it tells us if we're in a seller's market, it tells us if we're in a balanced market, and it tells us if we're in a buyer's market because the conversations change based on absorption rate. If you have less than 6 months worth of properties on the market, right? 6 months, use that as an absorption rate. Less than 6 months, we are still in a seller's market. So sellers have control and are more likely going to want the price that they want, right? If it's more than 6 months, I mean, we have some areas where there's 20, 30 months worth of inventory. It is now in the control of the buyers. So, property values, having conversations about pricing it right for the market of the moment, as well as condition of the property, knowing those things, those are the conversations that you're going to have with those sellers, right? And your job is to bring them value and to educate them and to make sure that at the end of the day, you're going to be able to get the job done and satisfy their needs, right? So, first and foremost, absorption rate. We look at those numbers every single month, they change every single month. And they change based on the property. So we keep it separate, residential versus co-ops and condos, right? Next thing I'm looking at, and these are reports that every realtor has access to, appreciation and depreciation. MLS puts out a summary by borough every single month. So, we're talking about a year ago where homes in Queens were appreciating 11% to last month depreciating 10% on average. I think that's really important for you to know that if you're going to have realistic pricing conversations. I'm looking at what's sold recently, and I'm looking at how that compares to what's listed, what's going into contract. I'm monitoring the interest rates. I'm monitoring what programs available for every type of buyer. So, like, those are some of the things that I focus in on consistently. Interest rates, looking at them daily. You can set an alert for yourself, and everything else you should know. You should be looking at, if nothing else, every single month, creating a cheat sheet so that everything's in front of you and having great conversations.
We also hear commonly, whether it be a lead or an actual client, like, well, I heard that X, Y, and Z, the national news said so. What is the danger of using national numbers as opposed to hyperlocal figures?
There is definitely a risk because every market is different. I mean, you need to focus on hyperlocal numbers. I mean, honestly, what's happening in California is going to be very different than what's happening in New York. What's happening in North Carolina is going to be significantly different than what's happening in New York. We
Hmm.
have different challenges that they don't have, right? So it's one thing to know national numbers because there are some things that are commonality, right? Gross domestic product, right? That's a national type of thing that affects every market. Unemployment rates, that affects every market. But when it comes down to whether or not a house has depreciated in the last 6 months, that's going to really vary by zip code, by hyperlocal neighborhood. It's not
Hmm.
even by county or borough or state. It's literally very hyperlocal.
Yep. And I made that mistake early on because I used to take these broad, even New York City numbers, and I was like, oh, this is the thing. And then as I run through my own analysis, for instance, if while I was running my comps for certain listings, I was like, you know what, let me just see what it is now. But then as I narrowed it down by that particular zip code, for instance, or that neighborhood specifically, I'm like, wait, what? I thought it would have been closer to the average of everywhere else, but you're seeing swings from neighborhood to neighborhood,
It
right?
swings from neighborhood to neighborhood. And like I said, you look at certain areas, like I do these numbers consistently because, well, one, it's my job to know these numbers because I can't help you if I don't know,
Hmm.
right? But you look at certain areas, like if we're talking, say, co ops, like Fresh Meadow, 16 months of inventory, 3 months on the residential side. That's a big swing, right? If you're not looking at individual neighborhoods and guiding your clients, especially buyers, as to they may have a better opportunity if they went the town over. If you don't know that, how are you going to guide them? How are you going to provide that value? So it takes not very long, and if you're with Keller Williams, it doesn't take any time at all because we already do it for you. Just to have a copy in your presentation, in your briefcase, in whatever you're carrying, so that you know your numbers before you walk through that door.
And speaking of interesting things that you only find in Keller Williams, just as an aside, for anyone who's interested in becoming a realtor, we do have a realtor course that you may be able to qualify for free, and Gloria would actually be the point of contact for you. So if you are curious, do me a favor, reach out to me or Gloria, and we'll get the ball rolling.
I
But with,
appreciate that. I
well, I
appreciate
appreciate
that.
you.
I want to just touch on one thing really quickly because,
Hmm.
my job, besides, teaching, coaching, mentoring, is really to educate like on the problem of the moment for agents. And you mentioned doing comps, doing a comparative market analysis. And newer agents, please listen to me for a second, right? Your biggest challenge right now is you're pulling numbers based on things that happened a year ago. And those are non absolute numbers, right? The way that I train the agents in this office is if you're going to go back and look at what sold 6 months ago, which probably was something that went on the market 9 to 12 months earlier, right? Don't look at what it sold for. Look at what it was originally listed for. Because a year ago, we were having bidding wars like crazy. People were overpaying for homes. They were priced right at the time. It's just because of the market, there were bidding wars.
Hmm.
So when you're doing your comps, I'm going to encourage you to look at that. Look at what it was originally listed for, what it sold for. Did they get 110% of asking? Because that's probably 10% that you need to consider when you're doing your comps.
That brings on an interesting conversation, right? Because, the reason why my argument is for working with a realtor and not doing it yourself, for instance, is because we should have another level of expertise to provide you, right? And one of the common things that we've run into is, you are not comparing apples to apples when you tell me that, the housing market was this or my neighbor sold it for that. The challenge over these past few years has been that, a lot of people like to make the comparison to 2008. It's not the same climate, right? It's
No,
not the
no,
same universe,
absolutely not.
right?
Not.
And now for the last couple of years, with the advent of the low interest rates and things of that nature, the importance of our position is to be able to explain to you why it is not apples to apples, right? Why your house should not be $1.5 million when the market is like we can't control that for you, right? We could help you market better, right, and give you the better probability. But I can't guarantee a 1.5 million sticker price when every comp and every sale is saying it should be 1 million. And so I think this is why these exercises are going to be incredibly important. Obviously for the agents we have in house, but for any other agent who's looking to become an agent, or maybe even if you're not a Keller Williams agent, I hope this is still helpful, because our job is important, right? Whether you're in our family or not, I feel like you need to do justice to the industry. So with that soapbox moment done, let's start jumping into the analysis portion.
There's a lot of great resources out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a real estate agent, you have a board, okay? Our board is One Key MLS, and they have amazing reports that do the work for you. I look at certain reports every single month. So one, I look at the MLS market reports because it is generic. It's going to give you a total number for Queens, right? I also look at what's called a market report generator, which is hyper local. I mean, you can look it up by zip code, you can look it up by area, you can break it out by co-ops and condos versus residential, you can look at closed versus pending, and it provides a wealth of knowledge. I personally like it because I'm a visual person, and they give you graphs that show you whether it's whoop going up or zoop going down, right? And I think that says a lot if you're including that in your presentations. For absorption rates, I'm a numbers nerd, but I'm not a rocket scientist. So, using the market statistics tab, it actually calculates the absorption rate for you. So tapping into resources that you're already paying for as a board member, and utilizing them. So those are definitely three things that I use every single month. The market statistics, they only update them monthly. Same thing with the report generators, but it's great tools. On a daily basis, okay, I am actually going into Stratus, which is our program for One Key MLS. And I'm looking at things like how many active listings there are. That's important, right? And then I'm also looking at, from those active listings in the last 30 days, how many of them had price improvements, right? Realtors say price reduction. It's a negative word, price improvements, right? So I'm looking at that, price improvements versus active listings. I'm looking at expireds. I'm looking at expireds every single day. Why are they expiring? I mean, it comes down to three things. One, they hired the wrong realtor. I'm sorry. No, I'm not really sorry, okay? They hired the wrong realtor. They overpriced it. Condition is poor. Maybe the agent, I seen recently agents offering out a 0.5%. We're humans. Two similar houses, someone offering out 2%, someone offering out a 0.5%. We're human, okay? So those are the type of things I'm looking at. I also look at the expireds. I look at the back on markets as a percentage of under contract, because that's going to give me a good indication of how many transactions are falling out of deals, and trying to figure out what systems we need to have in place so that does not happen, right? We teach a class called Bulletproof Your Transaction on how to make sure that doesn't happen. So those are some of the things I look at. I also look at once a month, MLS puts out a report called Zone Activity Reports. And it gives, and again, it's a zone, it could be a county or a borough, right? But it gives you insight into where we're heading. And numbers don't lie. So like those are things I definitely look at. I also, if I'm helping an agent for a specific property, I want to look at equity and growth, because I want them to be able to effectively have the net proceed conversation. So I use a program called ATTOM, ATTOM. We give it to Keller Williams agents when they join the office for at least free for 120 days. And then we typically continue that based on like what buyers they're using and whatnot. Lots of resources, free, because you pay to be a member of a board.
I didn't know about the zone report. I'm gonna want to take a peek at that at some point. You should have an update soon too. The IRS also has essentially a migration map based on filings. So essentially, they take the zip code from your previous year's tax return, and then when you file again, obviously you have to use your home address. So they take that zip code essentially, and they track migration from state to state. But now, from an agent perspective, for if you're only dealing with New York City, like within boroughs, it doesn't appear to be as helpful. But it does give you a sense in terms of from year to year, what is the trend of people either migrating in or out to the state. And if you think in terms of strategizing your business for the year, if that trend keeps up, in terms of where do you want to focus your partnerships on, right? And also where do you want to spend your efforts in terms of your market, right? Like it does affect the way you may structure the marketing aspect of your business. Right?
Absolutely.
But I have been trying to look for like data in terms of like shifts between neighborhoods, and to date, for the most part, it's just been as I go through to listings, or as I go to go through my open houses or showings. The usual question is, hey, so where are you guys coming from? Like as you go through iterations of those conversations, you tend to see patterns.
So just think about, like, when we're talking about data and we're talking about opportunities as a real estate agent, right? One, if it's an area that, the absorption rate is like 2-3 months, right? No inventory, definitely a seller's market. Why wouldn't you want to use a resource where you can research that zip code, pull up the list of every single person that's been living in their house for, say, more than 15 years, and start conversations, right? Whether you're door knocking, you're sending mailers, whatever it is you're doing, there are so many resources. You've got to be smart about this business. I mean, do you really want to take a listing, or do you want to be soliciting business in an area where there is just so much inventory that it's going to take you a while to get your money, right? If you're focusing on an area where there is not a lot of inventory, and now you're doing your due diligence and you're trying to see who the next person that might list in that area is and what that opportunity for them is. Now we're talking, right? And so, and you've attended my classes, so I teach these classes because you need to see where your next great opportunity is. The zone report, that's what they basically call it. If you are a realtor and you are in your info center, you want to click on where it says MLS market reports, and then it will open up a screen and it says MLS activity. So on the top, it gives you the February market reports. It shows Nassau, it shows Queens, it shows Brooklyn. They also do a Long Island market highlight piece. All of that's on the top. On the bottom is that zone activity report. So I like to look at these. Yeah, a zone is a big area, right? But when you look at, say, even February, right, it gives you this massive report by zone. And I know it's kind of small on the screen, but on the bottom, it's going to give you the prior month's activity. And again, the top is all zones. The bottom is counties. So knowing how many offices were active as far as real estate offices, how many offices were active in that month, how many new listings came to the market, and how they break out in terms of residential, land, commercial, rental, right? All of that is in a one-page report.
Is there a way for them to figure out what those zone numbers represent?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see at the bottom of every zone section, it gives you a letter. So the first grouping is Suffolk, the second grouping's Nassau, a third is Queens, right? And each zone, not to say Google it, but if you were to put Suffolk County Zone 20, it's going to tell you exactly what zone that is. And I'm sure if you're using the hyper link when you're entering your listings, it's also going to tell you there. And the other thing about this report is all on one page. Not only is it giving you the breakout of the zones, breakout of the counties, it's also going to show you year versus year. So January of 2022 versus January of 2023, how we're looking in terms of listings, where those listings are going as far as area. I mean, these are the type of things that numbers nerds, yep, a numbers nerd, proud of it, look at this, because it gives you insight into your next opportunity, and it also gives you information to share with your sellers to make sure that they're motivated for the right reasons to sell their home, and to share with your buyers so that you're making it happen because you're guiding them. If there's more opportunity to the left, let's go to the left. More opportunity to the right, let's go to the right, right? So I love the zone report. I love that it's one page. I love that if you wanted to, you could print out a couple of months and then just have it. It's like at your disposal. They're actually doing all of the work for you. So I definitely love that. And on the hyper local side, you definitely want to go deep, and you want to choose the market statistic reports, because that's going to tell you. You can look at a year, you can look at the last 2 months, it's going to give you the absorption rate, and it's going to give you the most current information.
The experience definitely helps, right? Because I remember, for me, I mean, my curiosity thing is, and maybe not always the greatest thing, but when I first got access, I started just clicking around. Oh, what's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? The reason why I say it's not always the smartest thing to do is because with my curiosity, I have been known to break things. So like, oh, I didn't know what this button is, so I clicked it, and they're like, why did you do that? I'm like, I wanted to see what it did, you know. Like in the past, what I used to do was, if it's a listing type situation, I'll kind of just list out all, whether it be the neighborhood or that zip code, or maybe both, right, or school district, whatever it is that I could find, and skew the numbers and manipulate, because I want to see every angle, right? And I would just kind of click all, and then I would go to the little calculator sign just to see what statistics will come out. And it gives you, and mind you, be careful, right? Because you aren't, like, for me, it's, you are an agent, right? You should be an expert. So don't pull like a Zillow move and just say all houses, right?
No.
I mean, if you're just going general information, that's a separate conversation. The case of a listing, let's use similar metrics, right? If it's like a 3-bed, 2-bath situation, don't put 5, right? We're not apples to apples. But if it's just a curiosity standpoint, then fine, right? Let's go through the gamut, but make sure you understand that the swing might be bigger. And the mistake that I found was, at one point I just said all residential. And so when I was pulling these numbers, I'm like, oh, the average is like 400,000, 500,000. I'm like, that doesn't sound right. And they're like, knucklehead. You see that little button that says condos, co-ops? Like, what are you looking, like, what are you interested in? I'm like, I don't know, all of it. No. Then pick up separate, right? Because a co-op you might get for $300,000, $400,000, right? Depending on area, and obviously higher in others. But if you're looking at like single family houses, then you might be looking at the $900,000 range, right? In the multifamily, you're looking at over $1 million, right? So, like, what is it that you're looking for? I guess for me, because I've tinkered around with the Stratus or the One Key, and I've also tinkered around with the Brooklyn MLS. I did, and wrongfully assumed that like the function should be about the same, right? I'm like, oh no, it is not. It is not. I mean, there's similarities, but they're not the same. So for me, I've realized that it might be better to go to the basics and figure out, if you had to pull the information yourself, like, what are the things that you look for, right? And that's why I felt it was important to speak with a master who does it. So if you were to say, look at one particular neighborhood, and just for the sake of argument here, we'll say, let's go with Fresh Meadows, right? If you were to go through Fresh Meadows, so we did mention that we would look at things like absorption rate. We would look at things, for me, I'd also look at like average days on market, right? And I'll look at that trend. But
list the sale price percentage, right? Because that's important. One, it's going to give you an idea if it was realistically priced in the first place. I also look at how many price changes they had, like to get to where they got to be, right? Sales now versus sales a year ago. Very different.
Is there like some quick hit type analysis that you would run through the programs that we have? Or is there like separate, are there like additional paid services that you would use?
Well, I mean, if you're a real estate agent, you would definitely go to One Key MLS first, right? And as far as the hyper local thing, you definitely, the more you narrow down that criteria, the more accurate your information is. So you want to narrow it down to a specific neighborhood or a specific zip code, and whether it's a co-op, a multifamily, a resident, a commercial, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and there's two things I look at. I look at every MLS member on average, what their statistics look like in an area. List to sale price, days on market, average listing price, average selling price, how many closings there were in general, right? So I'm looking at that. And then I narrow down the criteria because not every realtor is made the same. So I narrow my criteria down to just my office
Hmm.
because now I want to see how I compare or how we compare to the average agent. And typically there will be a drastic difference. So if you're going into a presentation and you are with company ABC and you know on average you are getting more, selling it quicker, having less price changes, you've got a significant amount of market share, those are things you want to share with the seller.
Hmm.
There's power in numbers and there's power in knowledge, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so those are some of the things that I do. Again, I do look at other resources. Like if you are preparing for, and this is a free service. So if you are a consumer and you want to find out some information that maybe you don't even know about your own property, Oasis is a great website for the 5 boroughs because in there it will give you tax rolls, it'll give you history of the property, it will give you zoning information, it will give you violations. You know, you can look at the Department of Buildings website right through there to see if there's an outstanding issue with a CO, all of that. If you're a consumer, it's a great site for that. So I do look at that. Other resources in One Key MLS that agents should be using: RPR, great resource. Please don't use Zestimate. Please, there was a reason why they call it a Zestimate. What time? When was the last time a Zillow agent showed up at your house to do a walk around?
Hmm.
There's a It's called a Zestimate for a reason.
Hmm.
One, they're lumping in without knowing the conditions of the home, and most often it is extremely inaccurate.
Yep. Over the past year, especially, we've seen how that estimate has played out because, I mean, the way I see it is if it's that accurate, it should be a sword you're willing to die on. And it looks like Zillow definitely bit that bullet hard, right?
I
Um,
I could tell you from personal experience. I had my home appraised for a number of different reasons, estate planning, all of that, and then I went on to and got his estimate just for fun, and the difference was over 50 grand.
Oof.
They devalued my home by over $50,000.
I mean, it's gonna happen, right? Because the unfortunate truth is, like obviously one of the things that we look when we compare comps is what's the square footage of the lot, right? How many beds, how many baths, what's the square footage of the house? Roughly is it built around the same year as the other buildings I sold? But one of the big determining factors is also what is inside this house, right? Are the quality of the floors okay? Are the walls good? Is the roof falling apart, right? And Zillow's not doing that, right?
No,
And allegedly they are fixing the algorithm somewhat to so it's it knows to differentiate the difference between like a multifamily and a single, for
hmm,
instance. But you really need someone who understands A, the neighborhood, B, who will actually use their eyes to scan to make sure that is the quality of this home the same as the one that sold next door, because the next door might have been a hoarder situation, right? And it sold because their inheritors decided to sell this for pennies on the dollar, right? But if you're not there, if you don't know, that you don't know if this estimate is correct or not, right? So this estimates, please, 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 you know, take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, if you want to ballpark it, fine. But I found that anytime there is discrepancies, my gut is let me just go to the source data, and for me it has been MLS,
hmm.
right? And if it's off, then I want to know why. But usually if it's an estimate type situation, the other commercial sites, I'm sorry, that's no, I'm not banking my career on that. It's
Nope.
just no.
Do your
But
homework. And if you're going to go to these sites, like at least, as part of MLS, there is a Realtor Pro that you get with your MLS account. At least there, if you're putting in an area, it's going to literally list every active listing. But to do that, when you go on MLS, you can actually do the same thing, like a lot easier. So it's a resource, but it's not one that I use.
And I do get asked by non-agents, hypothetically, like if we could look up resources wherever we go. I'm like, look, I'll still talk to a realtor, honestly speaking. And if it's somewhere out of, well, especially if it's not like anywhere near you, then go with a realtor in the area that you're looking in. If you really just don't, for whatever reason, if you decide you want to do a little self-research, do it at your own risk, right? Because for you to really fully understand the complexities, you're running a risk, right? But for me, I was like, look, if you want to check out, Redfin, if you want to check out all these other sites, don't look at like the estimate side of things. That's all nonsense. You look at their actual sales data, right? And a lot of these sites will have it. It might give you an broad overview, right? So if you want to look at like on average, don't look at the list price. Like what has things sold for in the last like month? What was the actual sticker price? Is it the type of house within a very close proximity to the place that you're looking in? Yeah, I mean, MLS, find a realtor. Even if you don't think that you are ready to buy or sell right now, at the very least, I would suggest that you find out what the situation is, what your situation is, and that way you could future plan. From an agent perspective, you might have to kind of adjust the way you approach your planning for your clients, right? For instance, the way I see things is I'm expecting prices to adjust a little more depending on all the financial stuff that is happening right now. And if the Fed has a way and unemployment dips significantly in this area, and keyword in this area, right? If it's elsewhere, not a problem. Sorry. But if it's this area, that's a different conversation.
Yep.
So then you might see more people who decide maybe we do need to leave, right? Prices are dipping, but maybe we do need to leave, right? Or vice versa of, dude, we locked in a crazy low rate. We didn't like the house when we first bought it, but with everything going on, maybe it makes more sense to stay here. That's a different conversation as well.
And that's the other thing with being hyper local. I mean, all of these national outlets, they put out what's called an affordability index, right? Basically, what percentage of your income is it going to take to pay your mortgage, your utilities, whatever, right? It's going to be significantly different from area to area, right? Because, maybe the salaries are higher somewhere or less somewhere. Maybe prices are commensurate with salaries in other areas. So understanding the affordability index also is important.
I guess my problem will typically be as I start looking for statistics, I think I tend to go through rabbit holes. So let's say I'll go through a hypothetical scenario here. So if I go through Fresh Meadows, I might look through zip code. And for me, I haven't figured out a way to break out all, like, for instance, property classes and then break out by month and then get the trends that way. For me personally, I found that I have to go one by one. So it'll be single family homes, co-op condos, multifamily, and then like get statistics separate for that. And then if I see that there are certain weird anomalies, whether it be lower or higher, I will tend to jump into Atom, especially like very interesting properties. So for me, I want to see if they're roughly what is the tax thing, because it will generally link to the government, the New York City site to see what the taxes are.
Right.
But then I like to look at the square footage. And the beauty of Atom is that it gives you, like, at least as far as they can tell, right, what square footage the house has and what is allowable. So for instance, Fresh Meadows, Bayside, you see a lot of houses where it says it has 1,300 square foot, but allowable is 2,000.
Right.
Right. So if you're looking to sell, that's a consideration, right? If the prices go down enough, does it make sense for us to just put the addition on the house and then put it into market? Or would we rather just leave it for the buyer and do it that way, right?
I love Atom. I mean, it knows your mortgage, so it gives us a good idea of equity, so we can have real conversations about what you can walk away with. So I definitely like that. The other thing, when we're talking about numbers, and I think this is another mistake that people make, especially if you're just pulling stats and you don't really know what you're looking at, there's a big difference in timing when you're dealing with an estate or you're dealing with a short sale or an REO. So if I'm looking at realistic numbers, I'm going to eliminate those because definitely if it's in probate, right? I'm definitely going to eliminate that because the timing is different. REOs and short sales timing is different. Not that we have a lot of those now, but it does skew your number.
Right, and that's the other. I think that's a commonly like missed thing. The one that we sold on 76 that in Brooklyn, they were like, "This house has like I think we want to see what's going on with that house." I'm like, "It's in probate." Right, so like they're like, why does that matter? Why didn't you? Why wouldn't you include that into your numbers? Because unfortunately, he passed away like 2 years ago, a year ago. I mean, it's not an accurate description of what's happening in your neighborhood. Is that one outlier the average? Absolutely not. Is that even the median or the middle? No.
No. So
Right.
those
So do you
things
want?
are important to consider too.
Yeah. And so like when I was looking through the co-op listing as well, there was like, oh well, we have this house that sold for like this unit that sold for 200,000. I'm like, did you take a look at who was selling it? And they're like, no, it was an estate. Okay, so why does that matter? Because their financial needs and their goals may be completely different. Right. In this particular case, at least the way, as far as I could tell, they sold it way cheaper than I think they should have. But I don't know their situation. Maybe they needed the cash immediately. Maybe there were other things that played
They have
into
a
play.
different motivating factor.
This is the beauty of it, right? So I love to look through the median because the issue that I have with the average is that even within, like, say, the single family space, right? Depending on how wide or narrow you're running that search, you might have, you know, I mean, I think at one point it was like a $800,000 swing between, right? And it's not always the best, right? I'll look at both still, but if the median makes sense, then at least I know that on average, that's like a reasonable point to start your like estimations. And then once I look at the average and I see a big swing, then I'm like, okay, let's dive in deeper, right? But it's a good starting point for me. And depending on the client that we have, I think that's also a consideration on how you run your metrics, I would say.
And
Or do you disagree?
No, I agree. And I'm also going to say, like, I know that there are agents that are pulling stats based on closed and pending. I only look at stats first on closed because as realtors, we're not allowed to disclose what the house sold for until it's actually sold. And when I say sold, I mean the closing day. When we close it out, that's what we're disclosing. So if you are looking at pendings, pendings may have great numbers. They're not real. That doesn't mean they sold for that. They could have sold for more. They could have sold for less. So pulling your numbers based on closings and not, I do look at pendings, don't get me wrong, but I don't use that as like a number to give me an idea, a realistic number of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that it does require more work. Like, for instance, I mean, and this has just been my approach. If, like, I will consider pending separate, but it's more from a perspective of understanding what was the list price that they put it at, right, and how long did it sit on the market before it went pending.
Correct.
For me, it's like sometimes I'll talk through with like friends and neighbors, and they'll be like, "Well, you're taking these numbers out. I feel like you're cherry picking too much." And the other flip side of it is that it's been on the market for almost a year, and it's pending now. But the list price was this very beautiful, shiny number. There's two things, right? First off, there's no guarantee that that price that's listed is what they agreed on in that contract. First off, right? But it will at least give me a better indication of what they listed it at and how long this thing sat on the market. So, if I'm sitting across from a potential seller, and they're like, I want that 1.6. They listed for 1.6. Okay, if you're really dead set on 1.6, right? Let's take a couple of factors, right? I've been studying the market, and the market isn't what it was when they listed it. First off, secondly, they even with that price, it sat there for a year. So in that year time frame, they had to pay for the mortgage, the property taxes, utilities, all this, right, and maintenance, because now you want your house presentable. So whether they're in the house or not, you still have to pay that. So with that said, are you okay with this, right? Or would you rather get a reasonable price that hopefully still meets what you want to net in your pocket, matched with the time frame that you want to sell it in, and we'll operate based off those premises, which is better for you, right? Some people want just to brag about the dollar amount they sold it for, fine, but at least I told you. You know.
Exactly.
Actually, you know what? I think I want to blindside you a little bit.
Uh-oh.
If you were to put like a top 3 analytical mistakes that agents will make, what would you think they are, or what would you say they are?
Well, generic. They're looking at a bigger area than they should. They're not really looking at a hyper local neighborhood, because I mean, just 11358 is a big area, right? So, not looking at a hyper local number. Not considering all the factors. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about what's listed, what's closed, what's pending, what went back on the market, what expired. I mean, things have happened, right? So not looking at all of those things, and not keeping up with the things that are going to affect all of those numbers. So inflation, interest rates, right? The availability of new programs or the limitation of new programs, like not taking into consideration of those things, because when you're looking at most of the numbers we're pulling, they're all what we call lag indicators. They happened, they're gone, they're not happening again. We need to be focusing on what they call lead indicators, things that haven't happened yet, and how that's going to affect it.
So as more situations arise, I'm sure there will be folks with more questions. So if someone were to say, hey, where's this Gloria chick and how can I reach out to her, what would you tell them?
Well, I'm all over social media. My office is in Bayside on Francis Lewis Boulevard. You can't miss us. I mean, we're a pretty big group. As far as my direct line in the office, 718-475-2756. If you know Alex and you reach out to him directly, he can give you my cell phone number, but we've got websites. We have a huge presence in Queens and Long Island, so I'm pretty easy to find.
And I will make sure that we put the links and contact info down below. But with that said, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. We miss you in the office. Have those babies grow up, will you?
Oh, you know, it is a bittersweet thing. And you know what? I'm actually looking forward to bringing him in so that I could kind of brag about my progeny.
Exactly. And this way you may be able to take a nap in an office while we, entertain.
Oh, see now you're making this deal way too sweet. But with that said, thank y'all for joining us, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.